Okay, welcome to Black Men Speak. I'm your co-host J.R. Stewart,
Good
and my
evening.
partner in
This
crime
is
here.
and good evening, everyone. This is your co-host Tommy Duncan.
And today, Tom, I'm going to put you in the hot seat again.
Again.
Uh, Again, yes, you're a resident professional hot seat person.
All right.
So, because you have a more of a middle general attitude than I do. I'm a little tight winded, far right person. So, but you're more of a centric, calm personality type. Um, so anyway, man. So the thing that I'm gonna put you in the hot seat on today is last week I was having some lunch. I was having lunch with a couple of people that I know, and one of them decided to take a pot shot at me because he knew I was a Republican. In fact, I even told him I was running for re-election because I'm the precinct chairman for my district out here, and so I was thinking about running in the upcoming election again, or maybe seeking another seat. And he made the reference that he called me an Uncle Tom, man. He thought because I was a Republican that I was selling out black people and that I was the kind of person that black people should be cautious of and be guarded of, um, because because Republicans are racist and there's nothing wrong, there's nothing worse than a white Republican. I mean, other than a black Republican. So I didn't take offense to it. I mean, I hear it all the time, so it was not that big of a deal. But here's the thing that was a big deal. Actually, I started thinking about this whole Uncle Tom nonsense. Now, if you familiar with the life of the true slave named Tom, I'm not sure why he was called Uncle because he really wasn't an uncle to anyone, but he was a sort of an elder statesman on the plantation.
Right. We're talking Uncle Tom's
Here's
Cabin
a
here,
man
right?
who, yes, here's a man who not only picked his allocation or quota of cotton, but will pick extra cotton to give to those who didn't meet their quota to keep them from getting beaten. Here's a man who never ever, even though he got beaten into an inch of his life several times, would not reveal any information about escaped slaves, how they escaped, where they escaped to, where they were hiding at. Um, Never went back and snitched on anybody. And on top of that, when he was promised his freedom, I think for $300, and he worked odd jobs when he was after picking cotton all day long. Um, but he was handy with his hands and stuff. Worked little odd jobs. Took a very long time to earn the $300 working on the side. His slave master took his money and did not free him. So I would imagine to slavers, and at that time, the only slavers were white liberal Democrats. They're the only ones who own slaves. Took the man money, Tom, did not give him his freedom. And at that time, he knew that he was not going to be able to put trust in the system and that he was going to have to escape and run away to get his freedom. Did everything by the white man rules, played by their rules, took the punishment even though it wasn't warranted, saved his money or worked like a slave plus some, still couldn't even buy his freedom, had money really pretty much taken and stolen from him. And this is the kind of person I would imagine for slavers really is a bad person. To them, this is the type of slave you don't want on your plantation. But for black people, this is the kind of man that we should admire. We should respect and look up to. But we don't. We use his name as a pejorative to put other black people down. And that got me to thinking, how in the hell, after all these years of slavery being ended, could this term continue to survive in the black community without some kind of help or aid from white liberal, socialist, progressive Democrats who've kept this word alive? There's no way in the world our people could have done this on their own. But yet, even today, we still believe that Uncle Tom was a bad person. Not a bad person to us. We couldn't have formed it on our own. This is a holdover from what white people thought about that type of slave at the time. How is it that they survived this long, Tom?
Well, that's a good question. I think that, I mean, you bring up some very good points in terms of some of the survival skills that the character in Uncle Tom's Cabin used to keep himself alive, and I guess as some folks would probably say, would provide cover for some of the other slaves on the plantation.
Yes, he
And
did.
I guess over a series of decades, and Uncle Tom's Cabin obviously is probably one of the most well-known books during that period of time that I guess explored a slave as a key character in a book. Now, obviously, there are going to probably be folks on both sides of the equation in terms of whether Uncle Tom was a strong character or not. But to shed a little light or kind of peel the layer back on that, I guess it's easy at this point in time, post slavery, 21st century, when you look at something like that, or even in the latter part of the 20th century, when you put it in the context of what happened during the civil rights era, or what happened during the Black Power movements, and you look at a book that was written at a period of time where the cultural dynamic in America as it pertained to black folks in a white dominated and white controlled America where they had all the power. They still pretty much have all the power. And you look at a character like Uncle Tom's Cabin or Uncle Tom in Uncle Tom's Cabin, and people would look at him negatively. Now, on one side of the equation, you could look at the character of Uncle Tom and you could say that he was a protector of the slaves and or someone who tried to provide cover for slaves so that they wouldn't be hung or lynched or something of that nature. But in certain occasions, when you look at it, some might think, well, he was one of those non-confrontational slaves, or he was non-aggressive, or some might consider to be a friend
All
of
of them
the.
were non-aggressive, Tom.
What's that?
All of them were non-aggressive. That's
Well,
why I
no, I
don't
mean,
like
not, not
slave movies.
no,
And I
not
don't
all slaves.
understand
Not all slaves were
why
not
20 or
aggressive. I
30
mean, if
slaves
we
did just
wait a
overpower
second,
their white slaves and
wait,
actually kill them.
all slaves were not non-aggressive, Jimmy.
What were they?
Well, I mean, if you look at someone like a Nat Turner, who was a slave, by the way, he wasn't a completely non-aggressive person.
No, he wasn't. We needed like a million more Nat Turners out
Yes, we
there
did.
killing and
Yes, we
burning
did.
down plantations.
Yeah. So I mean, you have folks, like a Nat Turner and folk, Denmark Vesey, and some of those folks who saw revolution as the only option of freeing black folks. And Uncle Tom, or the character of Uncle Tom, was written by someone who protected slaves, but obviously there were some people who probably couldn't appreciate his manner and his style. And I don't know that you can say that there's a right or a wrong way. There are just folks who are probably on the left or right side of the equation in terms of the methodology to either free or extend the life of slaves and or protect women and or children. And everybody has different methodologies of doing that. Uncle
Well,
Tom in
Nat Turner was probably more the Republican slave that rose up with one mission. Kill his white slave master, kill as many of them as possible, burn their plantations down.
well,
I
Jimmy,
wish we had a Turner.
okay, I would say this: we need a lot more Nat Turner Republicans if you consider him to be a Republican. We need a lot more Nat Turner Republicans if that's the case. Oh,
Well,
where are the
we
Nat Turner
certainly
Republicans
use
today,
a lot
Jimmy?
more of a Nat Turner types even today. Um, but here's my thing, Tom.
Okay,
Okay, you may not agree with his passive style, him buying into the system. He played
passive.
by the rules that were provided to him. Be a good slave. Other than snitching on other slaves who escaped, he did his part. He worked. He worked the fields. He worked odd jobs. He saved his money. He tried to buy his freedom. Eventually, he had to escape himself to get the freedom. I think he settled in Canada, where he became a minister and an abolitionist. But he found out the hard way that you can't play by the slave rules. You can't trust these people. They were not trusted. They shouldn't. They shouldn't have been trusted then. They certainly can't be trusted now. But my point is that how is their mentality? I can understand them not liking Tom type slaves and saying, "Boy, that goddamn Uncle Tom." I'm gonna let y'all know you don't want them types on your plantation. You don't want them among your slave type because he is difficult. He don't cooperate. Uh, he won't do what we ask. He does good work, but he not gonna sell out his other slave who escape. And that's money every time when them slaves escape. How is it that their mentality has become our mentality? How in the world do we ever accept that, their dislike for Tom and the way he behaved is part of our mindset? We should have always looked up to him as a hero.
Well, Jimmy, I don't think that a lot of folks, if they're on that side of the camp where they say you have to get along, I forgot the exact words, Jimmy, but it's kind of like the get along type camp where you can't stir up the pot too much. You have to do things in a passive aggressive style or in a style that's not going to disrupt things. And then you have folks who are completely on the other side. They're ready to revolt. They're ready to bear arms, like most Americans are. Most Americans, Jimmy, if we think about it, um, if you are doing anything that is a threat to their family, that is a threat to their country, that is a threat to their community, Jimmy, they're prepared to bear arms. The only folks who are taught to be passive, the only folks who are taught to pray about the issue, the other folks who are taught to wait are black folks. White folks have never, in America, on any major issue, have taken a methodology of we'll just wait it out and things will get better in the end. Maybe we just ought to pray about this. And that didn't happen during 9/11, Jimmy. When 9/11 came, they didn't say, let's pray about it. Now, we need to go get their asses and kill some folks.
Now, I agree with you on that one, Tom. I mean, it's not. I mean, today's issues are never an issue until they affect white America.
Right.
When black kids are dying from crack and from drive-bys, it wasn't really considered an American problem.
Exactly.
But now this opioid thing has now gotten into white America to the Midlands of America, and that affect white people. So now the war on drugs is something to be taken serious, and they will have to do something about.
Exactly.
So I understand that, but I'm
And
trying to
so,
understand that if this mindset of us adopting the mindset of our former slave masters, has survived for this long, what else of their thinking has survived also that is not serving us well today? See, my thing is that this is evidence that we need to cleanse our mind, have some type of renaissance ourselves, and decide that we're not going to accept the thinking, the logic, the philosophy of our former slavers one iota. That we need to reject their message, we need to reject their mindset, their concept, and free ourselves. That we can't be truly free when we're carrying on the thoughts of our former slave masters.
well, I mean that you bring up a very good point, Jimmy, because it's even in the Bible that said that you should not take on the ways of your oppressor. But also, if we look at even the 20th century more recently, Jimmy, we start talking about another very large and popular group of black folks who believe in that message. And you look at, well, even the early 20th century, when you look at Marcus Garvey and his movement, or you look at the
And
Nation
Marcus
of Islam.
Garvey should be a national hero that we should all celebrate and praise. But I hear some of these quote unquote woke Negroes, talking about his questionable business practices and the fact that he went to jail. But it wasn't easy for a black man to be trying to do business in the 1920s, especially when part of your business is freeing black people from their oppressors.
Well, Jimmy, it's not easy for a black man to do business today in a major scale, much less in the early part of the 20th century. It's not difficult
Well, it's a
for
lot easier now.
what's that? It
It's a lot
is.
easier now, man.
It is,
We
but
can
it is
use
not easy.
some garbage around today. Um, we can use a million or two of them around today. To help shape the thinking and the psyche of our people. My concern, Tom, is that far too many of our people, even the educated class, are still not woke. They still are adopting the mindset and the messages from their former slave masters, and they have simply become the overseers to keep the message and the process going.
Well, that's
We know
true.
that our
That's true, Jimmy. That's because we don't own our own narrative, and when you don't own your own narrative, then somebody else is going to be programming your mindset and therefore what's coming out of your mouth. So we talked about Marcus Garvey and his movement, and he believed that the only way that blacks in America were going to be free is to separate. They needed to go back to Africa. Now, I'm pretty sure that there were a lot of white folks in America who actually were cheering him on and hoping that he would be successful because it
they
would give
were.
black folks now that black folks have built America, why don't we go ahead and get them out of America? Or even if we look at the Nation of Islam during the middle part of the 20th century, and we look at Malcolm X, and we look at, of course, the agenda for the Nation of Islam at that time. He said the only way that you are going to find your own freedom is to separate from those who are oppressing you. And the only way to do that, whether it's go to Africa or go and find your own state in America, the only route that you are going to find your own freedom is separation. Go to your own state, build your own economy, provide your own food, make your own clothes for your own people, and build your own economies. And that's part of what we've been talking about.
Well, that has been what we've been talking about, Tom, and I agree with that. I don't think we'll ever have a nation state within a nation state. So
Yep,
that's
you're
never
right.
going to happen. We can give that one up.
Yeah, I was trying to think it was Elijah Muhammad, and then of course his spokesperson Malcolm X.
And as far as separating, I don't think we necessarily need to physically separate from white people, but I have been making this claim for a while that um, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, we need to separate from them. We can't do what white people do. We can't raise our kids and tie them out and talking to them the way white people discipline their kids. We can't have a sexual movement the way white people have because they come out okay. We come out with babies that we can't take care of. We can't have a drug movement that follows their drug movement. They can end up becoming president after their drug movement. Our people end up in jail. So every time we follow white people in their movements, even the feminist movement has destroyed some of the thinking between our women and men. I mean, so nothing has worked out for us when we follow white people. So we need to stop following them. We know what we need to do. The message has been clear. So as far as having our own and working towards that, every woke black person knows that. But for some reason, and here's what I think the reason is: we say we don't trust each other. Well, we know that was the way the former slavers kept us in check. That when you can't know who you can trust on the plantation, it's a way of keeping you in check and in control because you mess around and say the wrong thing, pass on the wrong message to the wrong slave or overseer, you could be lynched the next day. So not trusting was just part of the process. But how is it that process, those messages have continued to survive today? When we are educated people, many of us, and we talk about this, we know what the right thing is, but somehow we cannot motivate or gain any, what I'm trying to say, any critical mass with getting our people to come together to do the right thing. Now, I'll tell you, we are more upset about Popeyes not having that damn chicken sandwich than we are about anything else.
Okay, and I don't know too much about that, Jimmy, about the Popeyes chicken sandwich, but
YouTube it,
I mean,
Google it. See all the people fighting and getting upset over Popeyes running out of chicken and not having the chicken sandwich.
oh, is that what was that what happened? I
Yes.
saw something that said somebody got stabbed over a Popeyes chicken sandwich. I didn't know what
Yeah.
that was all
Isn't that
about.
pitiful? Somebody getting stabbed over a chicken sandwich. Now we
Yeah.
concern more about the inventory levels at Popeyes than we are about our own condition. We're willing to fight for the chicken sandwich, but we won't fight for our mental freedom. We won't fight for our kids to have a better school to attend. We don't fight for the things that we should fight for.
Well, you're
And
right, Jimmy, but that is because we are psychologically dependent on another group of people in mainstream
but
America.
Tom, how is that different than slave time? We didn't rise up and fight against our slave masters then. Well, a few of us did. A few
Right,
did, but the masses didn't.
of
You're
course.
talking about almost 12 million black folks in the South, slaves, up against 2 or 3 thousand plantation owners. We should have overrun their ass, burnt the houses down, and killed every one of them.
Well,
To send them back.
there was one factor that was preventing us from that, Jimmy. I think one of those factors is obviously weapons. If it's just like if you have a couple thousand folks on one side with some very advanced weaponry, some Gatling guns and some bombs, and then you have 20,000 people on the other side, and they have stones and some maybe a few knives or something like that. Well, I mean, with the exception of sheer numbers, they're gonna win some battles by sheer numbers, but when you have advanced weapons on your side, eventually they're gonna probably end up uh, having an advantage over the folks who have guns and rocks or something of that nature. So, all of that being said, is when you don't have law on your side, when you don't have money on your side, and when you don't have weapons on your side, those numbers are going to get cut down pretty quickly.
I agree with you, Tom, to some degree. And all I can say is we have the Haitians to show us, to set the record straight on how to deal with slavery when you're tired of being a slave. They went up against their slave masters. They went up against Napoleon's army. They ridded the island of every white person, except for a few doctors and nurses that they need for medical treatment. But everybody else, man, woman, child, without question, had to die and go. That should have been our. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to chase white people out of the South, but if we had killed enough of them, because after that, the British decided that they were going to end slavery throughout the Caribbean and Central America and South America, where they had slave colonies, and they used almost 25% of their national wealth in order to buy the freedom of slaves to end slavery. That's how much they were scared that the slaves in their colonies were going to do the same thing as the Haitians. Andrew Jackson was a little concerned also at the time, but he decided that if I freed all these slaves, what am I going to do with all these people? They can't work, they can't participate in government or business. So really, being on a plantation with a job, with somebody caring for them and providing for them, probably was the best place to just leave them and let this work itself out on its own. But if we had killed enough white people back then, I think we could have scared America into ridding itself of slavery, just like the Brits got scared, just like the French got scared, and the Portuguese got scared. All the European nations pretty much were scared out of slavery. They didn't get out of the slave business because they decided it would be a nice thing to do. The Haitians scared the hell out of them.
No, you're right about that, and unfortunately, Haiti has had to pay for it ever
They're
since.
still
But
paying
we
for it, I think.
Yeah, but I will say this much. One advantage that the Haitians did have in Haiti is they had the advantage of geography. To a certain degree, the Indians didn't have that, but there were so many factors attacking the Indians in North America at that time. But the Haitians had the advantage of obviously geography, knowing the geography better than the Europeans. And then when you look at the number of Haitians compared to the number of Europeans in Haiti, that's another thing. And then obviously they had a brilliant general. Now, unfortunately, Toussaint Louverture trusted the Europeans too much and allowed himself to get taken in, and obviously got in prison for the rest of his life until he died. Obviously, someone came in after him, but at the end of the day, they obviously had brilliant leadership in a Toussaint Louverture in helping to free them. Ultimately, he wasn't the one who brought them to ultimate freedom and carried it out, but you have to have a couple of things working in your favor, especially if you don't have at least parity in terms of weapons and money to advance a war, because obviously war is not cheap.
It's not cheap, Tom, and I'm not saying that we could have withstood an American army at that time, even though it was mostly a volunteer army and and state militia. But I think if we had enough Nat Turners out there, raiding, killing, burning plantations down, that maybe we could have made that a turning point to help end slavery a lot sooner.
Well, unfortunately, with the Nat Turner, and this is where people get real nervous. You talk about this whole Uncle Tom thing, and I'm not saying that he's that guy, but a traitor basically did Nat Turner in. At the end of the day, and
Yes,
unfortunately, you're dealing with folks like when you don't have a sense of unity within your community. Unfortunately, you're going to have someone who's always going to pimp on you or turn you in when you're building momentum. And that
yes,
is
that's true.
exactly what happened to Nat Turner.
So that is true. And man, we can't get out of our way. I mean, you're right. I mean, you take looking here, even here recently with the Black Panther Party and
Yeah,
the Nation of Islam. I
they got
mean,
torn up from
there
the
are
inside
probably
out.
many informants in those organizations working for the government than they had actual members.
Right.
Um, and they infiltrate every organization and group, wiretap, collect information. Um, that's why I don't believe the federal government doesn't know who killed Malcolm and
Of
really who
course they
killed
do.
Martin.
Of course they do. And they know who killed Kennedy too. Of course they do.
So, so anyway, man, we have a lot of waking up to do. I think that we have to, at some point, realize that we have been under the control and programming of people who do not, I say white socialist progressive Democrats, but certainly it's people who do not have our best interests at heart. They have a vested interest to keep our schools in deplorable conditions, to keep our kids undereducated, to keep black men and black women from coming together and forming strong families, from us disciplining our kids, to keep them on track, to keep drugs, alcohol, and crime in our neighborhoods, which produces stress. And now they've added the insult of not even picking up the trash in certain black communities. I mean, this is just begun, this is going beyond disrespect. I mean, at some point, we need to Nat Turner ourselves into rising up and letting folks know, black, white, red, or brown, Republican or Democrat or independent, that we're just not going to take it anymore. There's a limit to how much crap you can dump on us, and that we just continue to say, thank you, Massa, give me more.
I would agree with you, Jimmy. It ultimately, everyone's waiting for someone to step up and take the charge and be fearless and not be willing to die. And I think, those greatest leaders within our community, regardless of who they were, whether you talk about someone of a Frederick Douglass, or you talk about someone of a Sojourner Truth who's willing to die, or you talk about someone, of a Malcolm X or a Dr. Martin Luther King, or a Harriet Tubman for that matter, who's not willing to die. That's the type of leader that you need, because I mean, when you have someone who is willing to die for a movement or a cause that is greater than them, that is bigger than them, folks will stand in line, because most folks just don't have that type of heart or courage.
Well, you're right, Tom. And so we certainly try to do our part here on Black Men Speak to try to wake people up, try to get folks to see that we have to come together. Working together is the only way we're going to do this. Working as individuals, um, even in small groups, someone is going to sell you out and turn on you within your group. So you have to have enough members, a large enough group, to overcome those that are within your midst who will sell you out for a few coins.
Yeah, and I think Jimmy, I had this conversation with a good friend of mine a couple of decades ago. Is that when it comes to that type of movement, when you really have made a commitment that revolution is the only option, you've got to understand that in doing so, there are going to be some folks that you have to take out that look just like you because otherwise they're
Yeah,
going to compromise you.
yes, they are.
And that is the negotiation that you have to have with yourself going through the gate. That there are going to be some folks who look like you who are going to compromise the movement. And it's not about anyone individually, but when it's about your people, your survival into the next century, much less the next millennia, there's some folks you're going to have to take out who look just like you because they're going to compromise the entire movement. And unfortunately, that is what has happened to a lot of our most promising movements in America. They were compromised internally by someone who looked just like the folks
They never
who were
had a
trying to
chance.
take it to the next level.
Some of them never had a chance.
Absolutely.
Because as soon as they stepped off and got stuff started, like I said, they had so many spies and backstabbers and turncoats in the organization that there was no way they were going to succeed. So
Right.
the people thinking that we're having secret meetings don't even realize the FBI got so many recording devices in here on people in your buildings, tapping your phones. I would imagine now that if you try to do the same thing, they'll be all over your social media, your email, your cell phones. I mean, you just couldn't get enough burner phones to keep your communications private.
True.
So before we leave, man, let's do this. What is something that you think we can start doing? I know we've talked about this in the past about focusing on economics, focusing on education, but the reality is a revolution has to start somewhere. There has to be a turning point, a martyr who dies, some event, cataclysmic event that may trigger or be a turning point to actually light the fire. Well, where do you think that spark could come from potentially?
That's a good question, Jimmy, because I mean, it's sad to say, as many folks as have, I'll say, as you have just said, who have been martyred in our community from both sides of the tracks, that's a very good question. What would be the powder keg moment that would motivate the masses to make decisive change? And we're not talking about violent change. Ultimately, in America, it always comes down to violent change in America if we truly look at American history. But if we're
I
talking
mean, it may
about,
come down to that.
if
I mean,
but if we're
really,
talking about, but if we're talking about, well, I mean, think about this, Jimmy. If we're talking about collective power, well, Asians in America didn't have to move to a violent strategy in order to gain their economic power and independence in America. It was completely nonviolent and non-confrontational. Now they have different advantages than we do culturally. However, they have a strategy. Latin Americans have a strategy. Most of what Europeans have done in America have been primarily through violence, if we look at it for what it really is. But other groups have been able to do it nonviolent. Now, what I would suggest is this: if we're trying to make a change in America, everything ultimately is going to begin and end with capital, economics, industry. And that means that we have to make some very pointed decisions about how we're spending our time and our energy in terms of, one, in my opinion, turning off the TV because that's the biggest distraction that we have, leaning inward as opposed to outward for our resources in terms of our buy and our spending habits in order to create industries. And ultimately, Jimmy, we're going to have to go through what we would call an oven experience. Otherwise, we're going to have to get real uncomfortable because in a lot of cases, we have gotten very comfortable. We
Too
have got to get very uncomfortable in order for us to collectively move in a direction that's going to be towards our own benefit. Because I think we've had enough people die unnecessarily to have a powder cake moment, but that hasn't
yeah.
motivated us collectively other than to pray. And that's not getting us where we need to go.
Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up, Tom. But there was something that you said that I want to potentially cover next week when you talked about getting our kids out from in front of these TVs and screens. There's a study that came out. I heard about it. I need to go find it. And I'll send you the link when I do. That correlates um, white matter or white cells in your brain not maturing into gray cells that can be used for intellect and for thought and for memories. And that people who watch too much TV and kids who are sitting there with these cell phones and little devices to stay entertained are not developing the gray matter that they need. In fact, they now can measure your intellectual capacity based on how much white matter you have in your head. And when you expose kids to these phones and tablets and little devices to keep them entertained in television, their brains are not now they find out their brains are not developing properly. So by the time they become adults, if they don't have enough gray matter that has been formed in their brain, they have too much white matter, they're basically retarded. I hate to use that word. I know it's not PC, but they are mentally challenged. I mean, whatever you want to call it, they're not fully functional 110, 120 IQ adults.
Well, I can. I'm not surprised to hear that, Jimmy. I'd be if you could send me some information on that study. But if your brain it's just like it's a muscle because our brain is a muscle, and
Yes,
if
it
you
is.
are not using and developing and exercising and stretching your muscles, they go into a state of atrophy. And our
That is true.
brain is the most important muscle that has to be stimulated, developed, honed, stretched, and built over a lifetime. And if we're sitting up in front of a TV on average 8 to 10 hours a day, suffice it to say, you're not going to get very strong, Jimmy, if
You're
you
not.
are sitting in front of a TV physically, and you're definitely not going to get that strong intellectually by sitting in front of a TV 8 to 10 hours a day, which is the average time that the television is on typically in our households.
Let's do this, Tom. Let's see if we can find that study, read up on how they did it and what that sample was, and see if we can formulate a message around that. I don't know if other outlets are going to sound the alarm, but we may have to at least start the process here on Black Men Speak to not handicap our kids with these devices. All these parents who are giving out cell phones like lollipops, maybe you need to rethink that and take the damn phones back. Unless you to make sure your kids are not because all these kids sitting there doing this, may be destroying their brains for later on in life.
I would agree, Jimmy. It's numbing our brains because, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just like growing up using a calculator as opposed to growing up doing mathematics, graphing, advanced mathematical equations in your head as opposed to having to use a calculator. It's not even a comparison.
That is true.
You
That is
don't know
true.
how to do stuff. You may know how to punch some numbers into a calculator, but you definitely don't know how to do the work.
That is true. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and wrap up and say our goodbyes. Hey, we want to thank everyone who's tuned in, who's watching our videos. We got some decent numbers back from Google Analytics. So, we're doing okay, but we need to do a lot better. We need more subscribers. We need more people to hit that notification button so you can be alerted when new videos come out. And please spread the word. Tell other people if you like what you hear, please comment. We will respond to your comment. And if you subscribe to our channel, we will subscribe back in return in good faith. So we have a couple of new subscribers this week. Sometimes we need to turn it around and subscribe to what they're doing in order to show support for them also.
Sounds like a plan.
So go ahead, Tom. You can take it home, wrap it up with our viewers, and then I guess we'll see everyone next week.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jim. We want to thank everyone for tuning in. We want to thank everyone who is actively listening to us as we come out with new content. We look forward to your ideas in terms of topics and themes that you'd like us to address and getting you engaged in the dialogue. And most importantly, continue to fight the good fight.
With that being said, we see you until next week.
Good night, everyone.